Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult and Pediatric Institute podcast. This is a podcast where we get messy, we get real, we talk about real life things, and we do it with limited filters. I am your host, Nicole. Thank you for listening in today. It is still April, which means it is Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. And so this month on the podcast, every episode is going to be all things autism. My last episode was with the absolutely amazing Aurelia Fenty, the owner and founder of Chances Advocates. She's also a licensed clinical social worker, a therapist, and she's fantastic. And we got a lot of great feedback from that podcast. It sounded like people learned some things, they felt like it was educational, and that is the goal. So, before we kick off today's podcast, I just want to tell you I am getting more official. I'm very proud of this. I am no longer using my 12-year-old's COVID headphones to record this podcast, which is really exciting. I got an actual microphone. So for those of you wanting to start a podcast, there are a lot of options out there for microphones. I got this one, so hopefully you guys can hear me and look at me getting all official with this. Whoop, whoop. All right, so let's get into it today. Today, I want to talk about some politics associated with autism and some controversial topics. I like to dig into the controversy. That is me, my personality. I kind of lean into controversy. I lean into uncomfortable topics because I think that those are the topics that we need to get comfortable in the discomfort, right? We need to talk a little bit more about these things. I think that this is how we grow as individuals and as a society, is by talking about these really hard, taboo topics in a way that is respectful and honest, and that you keep your mind open to learning new things. So today's topic is about the two sides to autism of where people stand. You have one side where people want a cure for autism, and then on the other side, you have the autism acceptance. There doesn't need to be a cure. We just need to accept people with autism. And then what autism is, what autism is not. So yeah, let's dig in. So there's normally two sides to autism. You have one side that is looking for a cure for autism, and they see autism as something is wrong and we need to fix this. Then you have the other side of there doesn't need to be a cure for autism. There's nothing wrong with autism. We need to accept it. And so, just like everything else in our country lately, it seems everything is very politically correct. And I think that that drums up a lot of media attention. It drums up a lot of conversation on these topics, regardless of whatever topic we're talking about, right? Today we're talking about autism, but maybe we're talking about LGBTQ rights. Maybe we're talking about women's rights to carry. I think that there's more media attention when we can put the two different extremes on TV talking about this, and people get really riled up over it. But in reality, I think that the majority of people fall somewhere in the middle, right? Where we're not leaning far left and we're not necessarily leaning far right. We're falling somewhere in the middle, and we kind of have mixed views. And I think that that's okay. And we need to talk about that more. That it's okay to not be really far onto one side or really far onto the other side. So when it comes to autism, the cure side versus the acceptance side, I fall somewhere in the middle. I think that there's some days that my daughter's autism, I really wish they didn't have autism. There are some days where I see them struggle through things, and God, listen to me, I'm already getting emotional when I talk about this. And it's because there's some days that I see my kids struggle, and I wish they didn't have to struggle like they did. I wish they could better understand society and societal norms. I wish that they can fit in a little bit better with their peers, and they didn't struggle to understand body language as much as they do, and sarcasm, and how do I navigate this relationship? And some of that struggle has led to suicidal ideations and self-harm. And so that's really hard. And I know that a lot of that comes from a place of their autism. But at the same time, I also see so much beauty in their autism. I see that the way that their brain processes and how they're able to take these really abstract principles and these really abstract concepts and turn them very black and white. And that's amazing to me. Their ability to solve problems like neurotypical people cannot solve them. And I see their future being very bright if we can play off of that strength. And so, do I want to cure their autism? Yeah, some days. Some days I want to cure their autism. But I think most days I celebrate their autism because I choose to focus on all of the positives that come from them having autism, all of the positives being the way that their brain works and just how amazing their brains are. And so, what do I want to cure? Well, I want to cure their anxiety. I want to cure their depression. I want to cure their sensory processing issues that come along with their autism. Do I want to cure their autism? Well, it doesn't really matter because I can't cure their autism. And so there are certain things out there that we just have to accept it for what it is and move forward. And we can't get focused on something that's out of our hands. If it's out of your hands, it deserves freedom from your mind. It's the same way in that you can't cure a personality disorder, or you can't cure a genetic predisposition to alcohol disorder or substance use disorders. You can only try to treat it and treat the symptoms of that personality disorder. Do I want to cure all those other things that can sometimes be a result of their autism? Yes. And when we think of it that way, it's a much easier pill to swallow because there's a whole lot more cures for anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, suicidal tendencies, self-harm. There's a lot more out there that we can cure that and we can work on that. And there is a brighter future tomorrow. And that's what I do for a living, right? Is with the psych practice, that's what we're focusing on, is we're focusing on curing that. Sometimes it's tougher when the underlying cause of suicidal ideations, anxiety, depression is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It can be a little bit tougher, but the treatment is going to be the same. The treatment is going to be different therapies or possibly medication. Either way, it's going to be the same. And so, yeah, no, I'm not on the fence of should we cure autism? No, I'm not on that side. I fall somewhere in the middle of let's celebrate their autism, but let's also still continue to work on their mental health as a whole. And I think that as a society, that's where our focus needs to be. But also, as a society, we need to continue to ask the why questions. My science brain starts to kick in, and I have a lot of questions. And why are we seeing autism rates on the rise? And what is going on in our environment that might be leading to autism rates going up? These are questions we need to continue to ask ourselves as a society, is why. We should be questioning everything. Everything in our life, you should always have a question about it. That doesn't mean that you need to be aggressive with your questions. That doesn't mean that you need to be offensive with your questions. But I think that we need to continue to grow as a society. And in order to do that, we should be questioning everything. So with that being said, let's get into what autism is and what autism isn't. So autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It is likely caused during the first trimester of pregnancy. That's when we see a large amount of brain growth and neural cells being developed in the fetus. What autism isn't is a postnatal disorder. Post meaning after, natal meaning birth. No studies have been shown to support any sort of evidence of autism being caused in the postnatal environment. That means that autism is not caused by giving your child a vaccine. It's not caused by vaccinating your child after they are born. They are born with autism, period. What you vaccinate them with after birth is not causing autism. I don't care what some Playboy bunny said at one point as to the reason why her son got autism. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what she says. A ton of unbiased, objective scientists have studied this. I think as a society, that's when we start to get into real problems, is people that have never been educated on how to read a peer-reviewed journal article, what a data set should look like, what a double-blind study should look like. People that have no education in any of that are the ones that are questioning scientists. That's a real problem for me. Fortunately, these are often the people that get the largest voice too, right? And they make the most noise. These are the people that they choose to put on TV because they know what's going to come out of their mouth is going to be really controversial, and they know that it's going to be kind of ridiculous. And so people are going to have feelings about it, and maybe it'll go viral. That's a whole nother topic though. So then the question turns to, why are autism rates on the rise? Well, I think that that's kind of a loaded question. There's not a simple answer. Most scientific things in life and human behavior and human disorders, there's not a simple answer to it. If there was, we would all be exactly the same and no one would ever have any struggle. It's complicated. There is a medical doctor researcher, and he's pretty amazing. And his name is Daniel Geschwind. He's like I said, a medical doctor. He also has his PhD. He won a National Academy of Medicine Prize for investigating autism's genetic underpinnings. And he heads up the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment. And the way that he explains it is, this is going to be a direct quote from him. You can think about the causes of autism like you might think about the causes of pneumonia. There's no single cause of pneumonia. It can have many causes: bacteria, a virus, a fungus, or even a parasite. And that's true for autism, right? There's normally not a single cause. It's estimated that about 200 to 1,000 genes impact autism. About 80% of autism cases can be linked to inherited genetic mutations. We have had a lot of momentum in the field of autism research, especially with all the fundraising and Autism Awareness Month and doing different walks to support research. We've had a lot of momentum, and it's pretty cool that we can now kind of pin about 80% of autism cases to genetic mutations, when I can remember, 5 years ago, that number was closer to 50%. And so we are getting closer to figuring out what's truly the cause of autism. But in most science topics, it's not just nature, meaning genetics, how you're born type of thing. And it's not just nurture, meaning environment, what you're around, what you're exposed to. It's normally a little bit of both. And so I do think that we need to continue to ask the questions of, is it possible that our diet, anxiety levels, cortisol levels, these things in the environment that the mother is exposed to, could that be causing autism? I don't know. We don't know the answer, but we need to continue to ask why. And we need to continue to look into this. I think another reason that autism rates are on the rise in our country is because the stigma is going down. People in the past did not want to be labeled with the diagnosis of autism. And so they didn't seek a diagnosis. They just kind of lived life. And I saw someone else's quote on Facebook the other day, and I thought it was great. I'll paraphrase it. It was, I spent my whole life as a zebra believing I was some sort of messed up horse. But when I realized I was a zebra, it allowed me to accept myself and to stop comparing myself to all the other horses. And I think that that's beautiful. And that can apply to a lot of things and not just autism. But as we're understanding autism better and we're realizing, okay, this is just the way that their brains are processing external information, people are more comfortable seeking a diagnosis. We also saw a big change in how autism is diagnosed from the DSM-4 manual to the DSM-5 manual. The DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of mental health disorders and basically how all mental health disorders are diagnosed. And so in the DSM-4, there was autism and Asperger's, period. You either fell into the autism category or you fell into the Asperger's category. Now in the DSM-5 is where we got this autism spectrum disorder. And so they took a lot of these other disorders, and as they did more research and they came to better understand some of these disorders, they realized pervasive developmental disorders, sensory processing disorders, that these were all kind of symptoms of autism itself. But it could be a spectrum. It could be a huge range. There are specific criteria to have autism spectrum disorder per the DSM-5. That criteria is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction, restricted repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities, right? So that might be your motor, your stimming, things like that. It has to be present in early developmental period. And these symptoms have to cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of current functioning. Lastly, it cannot be better explained by an intellectual disability or a global developmental delay, although it can be co-occurring. So what else is autism not? Autism is not an intellectual disability. Some of our greatest minds in history, Bill Gates, Beethoven, likely Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, they're brilliant scientists and inventors because of their autism, not in spite of it. I can tell you both my daughters have an incredibly high IQ, and they can be the most manipulative kids on the planet, I swear. And it's because they are so smart and they don't fully understand social norms, right? And so sometimes that can be sort of a dangerous mix. But just because someone has autism does not mean that they have a low IQ, does not mean that they have impaired intellectual functioning, does not mean that they have a learning disorder. We see a lot of comorbidities with intellectual disability, learning disorders, things like that. But every child, every individual is just that. They're an individual. They're their own person, right? And so there is no cookie cutter. And so don't just assume that because someone has autism that they're not smart. Even if they're unable to verbally communicate, that does not mean that they're not highly intelligent. It does not mean that they don't have other means of communication outside of just verbal communication. And so I think that this better understanding and this better acceptance of what autism is, that's why more people have been willing to seek a diagnosis, and those numbers are on the rise. So what does autism look like? Early signs of autism are things like delayed language skills, a lack of functional language. My younger one, she's 8 now, but she did not start talking outside the house until she was about 3. She would grunt. She hated being around people she didn't know. If she knew you, though, she'd talk your ear off. But if she was outside the house, at school, things like that, she did not talk. Another early sign of autism is they're not responding to their name by 9 months of age, that they're repeating odd movements or actions. Maybe they're arm flapping. Maybe they're spinning in a circle. Maybe they're not playing with their toys functionally. They don't want to play with the cars and make the cars go vroom vroom all around all the time and go on different car trips with their toy cars. Instead, they want to line them up. That's kind of an early red flag. They're not noticing when others are hurt or they're upset by 24 months of age. They might be getting upset by minor changes in their schedule. They're demonstrating delayed movement skills. Maybe they're toe walking, possibly have a flat affect. They aren't showing any real facial emotion. They have limited pretend play, things like that. Those are all kind of early signs of autism. Those are red flags. That doesn't necessarily mean that your child has autism. Screening should be getting done at an absolute minimum per the American Academy of Pediatrics at 18 months and 30 months old. Unfortunately, a lot of providers, they do those screenings super quick. They don't really give a whole lot of thought to them. And then even if they do screen positive, unfortunately, a lot of providers don't make appropriate referrals. They don't really know where to send people. And so parents get stuck in this endless loop of referrals. That's exactly what happened to me. My husband and I noticed she would do this arm flapping and super wide mouth. When she was about 6 months old is when we noticed it first started. By the time she was 1, my husband actually made the comment to me, "Hey, I don't know if this is really a cute little baby quirk anymore. Something else might be going on. We should look into this." And so I dove into all sorts of specialists and a neurologist and a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And, obviously it started with the pediatrician, and he was able to refer me to all these different specialists. And we did brain MRIs and we did this and we did that. And by the time she was 4 years old, she had this laundry list of diagnoses. It was sensory processing disorder, complex motor stereotypies, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder. And the list went on and on, it felt like. And it was really just, it wasn't until she was about 7 years old. And that was when I had the courage to say to her neurologist, "Hey, do you think this could be autism?" And I said it almost in a whisper voice because I was so nervous that that might be what this was. And he said her name, and she looked at him, made eye contact. And then he looked at me and said, "No, she doesn't have autism. She makes great eye contact, but you should get her ABA therapy. It'll change her life." Well, let me go ahead and tell you what autism is not. Autism is not someone who doesn't make eye contact, period. Again, everyone is an individual. Her eye contact was very much so a learned behavior. She had been told since she was an itty bitty baby, "Hey, look at me when I'm talking to you." So she had learned to make eye contact, that was an appropriate social expectation for her to do. Just because a child is making eye contact does not mean that they do not have autism. A lot of the times when we're evaluating some of the tougher cases, most often it's girls, and it's highly intelligent girls that have autism. They make eye contact. And if you didn't know what to look for, you would completely miss that. But a lot of the times their eye contact, it feels forced. They're holding eye contact a little bit longer than they should. They're making eye contact where I like to say it feels like they're looking into your soul. It's very heavy eye contact. And you can tell that it's because that's often a learned behavior for them to make eye contact. Another thing about autism is boys are often diagnosed more than girls are. That doesn't mean that boys are more likely to have autism. It just means that boys are more likely to get diagnosed with autism. With girls, a lot of this, same thing with ADHD, a lot of what comes into play here is society's expectations. We're going to spend a whole lot more time as a society teaching little girls how to behave, how to be proper, how to be seen, not heard, things like that. Whereas boys, we somehow just kind of let them be kids. And if a boy is running around and they're being rambunctious, it's, "Oh, look at them, they're just being a boy." A girl is running around and they're being rambunctious, and it's, "Oh, she doesn't know how to behave like a lady," which that's crap too. And we can talk about that another day. But because of that, girls are taught really early on how to mask their symptoms of autism. And so quite often, it's not until the struggle gets real and it's seriously impacting their mental health that the parents will finally seek a diagnosis for autism in a girl. Autism also does not discriminate among races at all. We see autism is prevalent in every race, whether it is Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Native American. We're seeing autism rates are prevalent across the board. It's not discriminating into one racial population more so than another. With all of that being said, the last thing I want to cover is, what do you do if you are suspecting autism? You should start with your pediatrician doing an autism screener. Hopefully they've been doing them at every well child visit. And then you're going to want to see a specific type of provider that it's within their scope to diagnose a mental health disorder, give a medical diagnosis. Next podcast episode, I'm going to dig in a little bit more to IEPs, 504, psychoeducational diagnoses. So I'm not going to cover that as much right now, but there is a difference between a medical diagnosis and a psychoeducational diagnosis. You're going to want to seek someone that has the capability to give a medical diagnosis. That might be a medical doctor, a licensed clinical psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker, and in some states, a licensed mental health counselor, depending on whether or not it's within their scope of practice. The other thing is these providers, they need to be specially trained in autism. One of the tests that we use at the Adult and Pediatric Institute is the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. It's called the ADOS-2, the second edition. It's kind of the gold standard. It's the one that most insurance companies want to see used. And so we incorporate that into our comprehensive diagnostic evaluation. A comprehensive diagnostic evaluation, a CDE, it is more than just doing an autism evaluation and saying, yes, here's the diagnosis. There's a lot more politics involved with it, unfortunately, through Medicaid and ACA and insurance payers and things like that. But the ADOS is one part of it. We're actually kind of unusual in that my partner, Dr. P, is comfortable evaluating for autism. She had to do a lot of additional training to get comfortable with that. Most psychiatrists tend to steer away from it. And they'll say, ooh, that's neurodevelopmental. That's outside my scope as a psychiatrist. I'm not really comfortable with that. You're going to want to see a neurologist. Well, neurologists will say, ooh, that's neuropsychological. That's outside my scope. You're going to want to see a psychiatrist. Or maybe someone at some point points you towards a developmental pediatrician. Developmental pediatricians are fantastic. The problem is there's hardly any of them in our entire country, and a lot of them are retiring. So if you're out there questioning what specialty to go into, I say pick that one. You'll be in high demand right off the get-go. But that's a medical doctor that specializes in developmental disorders and neurodevelopmental disorders. Another common misconception is to get an autism diagnosis, you need to go see a neuropsychologist. Well, that's not necessarily true that you only have to see a neuropsychologist for an autism diagnosis. A neuropsychologist is a specialty psychology degree in neuropsych that has done additional training, but they're just one of the providers that can diagnose autism. We get a lot of questions and there's a lot of confusion about the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor. That means that they went through all of med school, same as every other medical doctor. They went through internship, residency, sometimes fellowship, things like that. But as a medical doctor, a psychiatrist can prescribe medications. A psychologist or neuropsychologist means that they have either a master's or a doctorate degree in psychology, possibly a PhD in research psychology, whatever their specialty is, that they're able to practice within the field of psychology. If they are licensed clinical psychologists, a licensure is different than just getting a degree. They have to meet certain criteria to get a licensure. Then they can give a medical diagnosis. There's different pros and cons to both, right? Everyone practices within their scope. We find that it works best when we're all working together. There are certain tests that psychologists can do that medical doctors can't do, that a psychiatrist can't do. IQ testing, learning disability testing, that's very specific to a psychologist. And so we contract with different psychologists and neuropsychs so that if we're suspecting that there might also be a comorbidity of a learning disability, dyslexia, things like that, we can send them over to one of the neuropsychs that we contract with to do that additional testing. As a psychiatry practice, we're able to not just look at autism in these evaluations, we're also going to evaluate for ADHD, for obsessive compulsive disorder, which is OCD, for oppositional defiance disorder, which is ODD. We're able to evaluate for generalized anxiety disorder, depressive type disorders, a whole host of other psychiatric disorders we're able to incorporate into these evaluations so that our evaluations are really robust. Another part of the comprehensive diagnostic evaluation, probably the most time-consuming part, is the report that we give you afterwards. We do a complete deep dive into someone's history because of that one little spot on the DSM-5 that says it has to have been present during the early developmental period. We're going to do a deep dive into the history. What that deep dive looks like is a thorough parent or caregiver questionnaire that we're asking about all their developmental milestones, things like that. We're also going to collect any past evaluations that that child has had, and we're going to incorporate those into the report as well. That might be early steps, that might be occupational therapy, speech language pathology evaluations, ABA evaluations, neuropsych evaluations. Any past evaluations that touch on this topic, we're going to request those records so that we can review them and incorporate them into the report. Because in this report, we're going to want to build a case for this child and to support the diagnosis. We also try in this report to take away any ammo that the insurance or school boards or Social Security might have to not recognize this diagnosis. We try to cover every single one of our bases, any questions that they might ask. We try to cover that in the report. How do we do this? Well, we do this because we stay in contact with our families and we find out, hey, were you able to get services started? Did they kick back the report for any reason on improving services? What were those reasons? And then we track that data and we look at why are insurance companies kicking this back. We also stay up to date with ACA rules and Medicaid rules as to what they want to see in these comprehensive diagnostic evaluations. As you can see, with all the work that has to go into these, it's time consuming. And it takes a lot of the provider's time. And so it costs a lot of money to be able to hire the providers and kind of clear their schedule for a day or a couple days to be able to do these evaluations as thoroughly as they need to be done, as well as all the other support staff in the office, like myself or our psychometrist or our client care coordinator, to collect any past evaluations, to collect all the history, to then parse through all of that and organize it in a way that makes sense. And so a lot of providers out there have stopped doing these evaluations because one, insurance is only going to reimburse anywhere between $200 to maybe $600 for these evaluations. And it's upwards of, it could be up to 16 to 18 hours worth of work for a really, really complex child with a complex history. Offices would go under if they accepted insurance and then took that much of their provider's time. Another reason is because the goalpost is always changing, it feels like. They're constantly trying to change the rules or changing what's required for these evaluations. And it's getting more and more complex of what we have to do in order to build a case to support an autism diagnosis for a child. Our goal as a practice is to educate other providers on how to get comfortable with autism, what autism is, how to become an autism expert if they want to, how to get certified. We are certified autism specialists by the IBCCES. It's additional course that we took. We're also certified ADOS evaluators, additional course. So it's additional licensure and certifications that you can get in order to be just well-rounded in autism and be able to evaluate children with autism and then make that diagnosis if you're a medical doctor or you're an LCSW or whatever you might be. Ultimately, as long as it's within your scope of practice to give a medical diagnosis or a mental health diagnosis, then you have the ability under your licensure to diagnose autism. You just need the additional training in it and certification. So this podcast covered a whole lot of things. It talked a lot about the politics of autism. There's a lot more to it than just this. But, no one wants to listen to me talk for a 2-hour long podcast. And so we'll kind of break this up a little bit more. Another hot button topic, like I had already mentioned, is the IEPs and 504s, psychoeducational evaluations, the school system, what to do after your child has been diagnosed with autism. What are your next steps? What are some resources? So I'm going to talk about that in my next podcast. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you learned a little bit more. Feel free to leave me a comment. I will answer your questions in the comments. Go out and conquer your day.